The distress beacon screamed across 17 star systems before anyone bothered to answer it. Most civilized species had protocols about responding to calls from the Outer Rim territories. Too dangerous, they said. Too many pirates, rogue AI, and worse things that made their homes in the dark between stars. The beacon originated from Kepler 442c, a mining colony on the edge of known space. The automated message was simple and desperate. Hostile forces have taken our colony. They're killing civilians. Please, someone help us. We have children here. For 3 standard days, the beacon broadcast to empty space. The Galactic Council received the transmission and filed it under regrettable losses. The Zephyrian Navy marked the system as compromised and updated their navigation charts to avoid it. Even the mercenary guilds deemed it too risky for the probable payout. Then the humans heard it. Captain Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the UES Retribution, a heavy cruiser that had no business being this far from Earth. Officially, they were conducting a deep space patrol. Unofficially, they were looking for trouble, the kind of trouble that seemed to find human colonies with disturbing frequency. "Ma'am, we're picking up an old distress call," reported Lieutenant Torres from the communications station. "It's been broadcasting for 72 hours. "Let's hear it," Chen said, crossing her arms. The desperate voice filled the bridge. By the time it finished, the temperature in the room seemed to have dropped several degrees. Chen's jaw was set in a way that her crew had learned to recognize. Someone was about to have a very bad day. "Where's it coming from?" she asked. "Kepler 442c, mining colony, about 400 souls according to the Colonial Registry." "Any other ships responding?" Torres shook his head. "Nothing on sensors, ma'am. Long-range scans show the system's been marked as a no-go zone by most of the major powers." Chen turned to her tactical officer. "Commander Reeves, what do we know about hostile forces operating in that region?" The grizzled veteran pulled up a holographic display showing the Outer Rim. Red markers indicated known pirate activity, slave routes, and worse. "Could be Kranich raiders. They've been hitting soft targets lately. Or maybe the Void Syndicate. Either way, if they've been there for 3 days..." He didn't need to finish. "Time to intercept. 18 hours at maximum burn." Chen looked around her bridge at faces that had seen too much of the galaxy's cruelty. These weren't fresh academy graduates full of idealistic dreams. These were veterans who had learned that sometimes the only way to stop evil was to be more terrifying than the evil itself. "All hands, battle stations. Set course for Kepler 442c, maximum burn, and someone wake up the Marines." The Retribution was not a typical human vessel. While other species built their ships for efficiency, elegance, or speed, humans built theirs for war. Every line of the heavy cruiser spoke of violence barely contained. Railguns that could punch through a mountain. Missile batteries that could sterilize a small moon. And in the belly of the ship, 300 of humanity's finest Marines, sleeping in drop pods like seeds of destruction waiting to be planted. As they accelerated toward the beacon's source, Chen reviewed what intelligence they had on the system. Kepler 442c was a mining world, rich in rare earth minerals needed for faster-than-light drives. The colonists were mostly families, drawn by the promise of good wages and a chance to build something new. They had basic defenses, nothing that would stop serious raiders. "Ma'am," Torres called out, "I'm picking up chatter on known pirate frequencies. Looks like it's the Kranich, all right. At least 6 ships, maybe more." The Kranich Collective was a loose alliance of raiders that had been plaguing the Outer Rim for decades. They were known for their brutality and their practice of taking slaves for the illegal markets in the galactic core. What made them particularly dangerous was their use of former military hardware and their willingness to kill anyone who got in their way. "Any word from the colony?" Chen asked. "Negative. The beacon still broadcasting, but no direct communications." That was bad news. Either the colony's communication array was down, or there was no one left to operate it. Chen felt the familiar cold anger building in her chest, the same feeling she'd had when she saw the aftermath of the New Geneva massacre. 18 hours later, the Retribution dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Kepler 442 system. What they found confirmed Chen's worst fears. The mining colony was dark. No lights, no energy signatures from the industrial complex. But in orbit around the planet were 8 Kranich vessels, ranging from converted freighters to military surplus destroyers. They were clearly in the middle of stripping everything valuable from the colony. "Sensors show life signs on the planet," reported the science officer. "But they're faint and scattered. Looks like most of the population is being held in the main habitation dome. And the raiders? Confident. They're not even maintaining proper watch. Probably figure no one's coming to help." Chen smiled, and several bridge officers unconsciously stepped back. It was not a pleasant expression. "They're about to learn something about human nature," she said. "Launch recon drones. I want to know exactly where every hostile is positioned. Then get me Major Kowalski." The Marine commander appeared on the bridge, still strapping on his combat armor. Kowalski was a bear of a man, with scars that told stories of a dozen worlds where humans had decided to make their displeasure known. "Captain, I hear someone needs killing. Mining colony. Civilians being held hostage by Kranich raiders. Unknown number of casualties, but we have to assume the worst." Kowalski nodded grimly. The Kranich had a reputation for cruelty that was notorious even by Outer Rim standards. They didn't just kill their victims, they made examples of them. "What's the tactical situation?" Chen gestured to the holographic display showing the planet below. "Main habitation dome here. That's where they're keeping the survivors. Industrial complex is being stripped. The raiders have 8 ships in orbit, but they're not expecting trouble. Drop pods? Negative. Too much risk to the hostages. We go in quiet first. Secure the civilians. Then we show these bastards why attacking human colonies is a career-limiting decision." The plan was elegant in its simplicity. The Retribution would use its stealth systems to approach the dark side of the planet, while small teams of Marines infiltrated the colony using atmospheric insertion vehicles. Once the civilians were secured, the ship would reveal itself and give the raiders a choice: surrender or die. Chen knew which option they'd choose. The Kranich had never surrendered in their entire history. 3 hours later, the first Marine teams were on the ground. The reports that came back made Chen's blood run cold. The raiders hadn't just killed some of the colonists. They'd made a sport of it. Bodies were displayed as warnings. Families had been torn apart, literally. The survivors huddled in the main dome were traumatized beyond easy healing. "Ma'am," came Kowalski's voice over the comm, "civilians are secure. We've got 147 survivors out of 400. The others—" His voice trailed off. Chen closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, her expression had changed. The last trace of mercy had left her face. "Understood, Major. Get our people clear. We're about to send a message." She turned to her weapons officer. "Target the raider ships. I want clean kills on all of them." "Ma'am, shouldn't we offer them a chance to surrender?" Chen looked at him with eyes like winter storms. "Lieutenant, when someone tortures and murders 253 civilians, including children, they forfeit their right to mercy. Fire at will." The Retribution revealed itself like a nightmare emerging from the dark. The first the raiders knew of its presence was when their lead destroyer simply ceased to exist, vaporized by a concentrated barrage of railgun fire. The second ship lasted long enough to get off a distress call before missiles turned it into expanding plasma. The remaining 6 ships tried to run. It was a futile gesture. The human heavy cruiser was faster, better armed, and crewed by people who had seen what the raiders had done to innocent families. One by one, they died. The last raider captain tried to surrender when he realized his ship was crippled and his crew was dead. Chen listened to his pleading transmission with an expression of stone. "Please, I yield. I surrender. By galactic law. You must accept—" She cut the transmission and nodded to her weapons officer. The final raider ship joined its companions in death. In the aftermath, as the Marines organized the evacuation of the survivors and the investigation of the atrocity, Chen stood alone on her bridge, looking down at the planet where 253 people had died because help had come too late. "Ma'am," Torres said quietly, "the Galactic Council is demanding an explanation for our actions. They're saying we violated the warfare accords by refusing surrender." Chen didn't turn around. "Tell the Council that humanity has reviewed the accords and found them lacking. We have our own rules about how to deal with monsters." Word of the Kepler 442 incident spread through the galaxy faster than light itself. The human response had been swift, brutal, and absolute. No quarter asked, none given. In the civilized core worlds, diplomats clutched their pearls and spoke of human savagery. In the outer rim territories, colonists and merchants whispered of the ship that had come when no one else would, and of the terrible justice it had dispensed. The raiders heard the whispers too, and many of them began to avoid sectors where humans might be operating. But not all of them were smart enough to take the hint. Chen knew there would be consequences. There always were when humans decided that the galaxy's rules didn't apply to protecting their own. But as she watched the last transport carry survivors away from the dead world below, she found she didn't care what the Council thought. The galaxy was about to learn that humanity's compassion had limits, and that those limits had been reached. 6 months after Kepler 442, the galaxy had not forgotten. The Galactic Council convened emergency sessions, debating humanity's excessive response to pirate activities. Diplomatic protests flooded Earth's colonial administration. Trade partners threatened sanctions. The Zephyrian Empire filed formal complaints about human barbarism in space. Captain Sarah Chen received her new orders while the Retribution underwent repairs at the orbital shipyard above New Canberra. She was to report to Admiral Harrison immediately upon arrival at Fleet Command. The tone of the message suggested she was about to become a scapegoat for humanity's sudden reputation as the galaxy's most dangerous species. The meeting did not go as expected. Admiral Harrison was a weathered woman who had served in the Centauri conflicts and the machine wars. Her office walls were covered with commendations, battle honors, and pictures of ships that no longer existed. When Chen entered, Harrison was reviewing casualty reports from recent pirate attacks. "Captain Chen, sit down." Chen remained standing. "Sir, I assume this is about my actions at Kepler 442. I take full responsibility for—" "Shut up and sit down, Captain." Chen sat. Harrison tossed a datapad across her desk. "Read that." The pad contained incident reports from across the outer rim. Pirate attacks had decreased by 70% in sectors where human ships operated. Slave raids had virtually stopped in 3 entire systems. Several major raider groups had disbanded or fled to the galactic periphery. "Your little massacre sent shockwaves through every criminal organization from here to the Magellanic Clouds," Harrison said. "Half the pirate fleets in known space are running scared, and the other half are too stupid to live much longer." Chen looked up from the datapad. "Sir, the Council wants your head, Captain. They're calling for your court-martial, demanding you be handed over for trial under galactic law." Harrison smiled grimly. "I told them to go to hell." The Admiral stood and walked to her window, looking out at the massive shipyard where humanity's fleet was being expanded at an unprecedented rate. Construction docks that had been empty for decades now swarmed with workers building new vessels. "The Council thinks they can dictate terms to us. They think we'll fall in line like good little citizens of their precious galaxy-spanning democracy. They're wrong." She turned back to Chen. "We've been too soft, too willing to play by rules written by species that have never seen real war. That changes now." Harrison activated a holographic star map showing the entire galaxy. Red zones marked areas of high pirate activity, while blue zones indicated safe shipping lanes protected by various fleet patrols. The Outer Rim territories have been abandoned by everyone except us, 60 billion human colonists living in systems that the Council considers acceptable losses when pirates attack. Meanwhile, core world shipping lanes get constant protection because that's where the votes and money are. Chen studied the map. The pattern was clear. Human colonies were scattered throughout the dangerous regions, while alien civilizations clustered in the safe, well-protected core systems. New orders, Captain. The Retribution is getting a squadron. 4 heavy cruisers, 2 assault carriers, and support vessels. You're being promoted to Commodore and given command of Task Force Retribution. What's our mission, sir? Harrison's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. Anti-piracy operations in the Outer Rim. Rules of engagement are simple. Any hostile force threatening civilian populations is to be eliminated with extreme prejudice. No surrender accepted from slavers, child killers, or anyone who targets non-combatants. Chen felt a chill run down her spine. Sir, that's essentially declaring war on half the criminal organizations in the galaxy. Not declaring war, Commodore. We're already at war. We have been since the first human colony got attacked while the Council filed paperwork and wrung their hands. The only difference is now we're fighting back. The Admiral handed Chen a sealed data chip. Your full orders. You'll be operating with complete autonomy. No oversight from the Council, no restrictions beyond the laws of Earth and her colonies. Make them afraid, Sarah. Make them so afraid of attacking human civilians that they'd rather turn to honest work. 3 weeks later, Task Force Retribution deployed to the Perseus Arm, one of the most lawless regions of the galaxy. The squadron consisted of 5 heavy cruisers, including Chen's flagship, 2 assault carriers packed with marines, destroyers, frigates, and support vessels. It was the largest human military force ever deployed outside of established space. Their first target was the Helix Nebula, where the Crimson Tide Syndicate had established a base of operations. The Crimson Tide specialized in raiding agricultural worlds, stealing food supplies that they sold to the highest bidder while entire populations starved. The nebula was a perfect hiding spot. Dense gas clouds interfered with sensors, and the complex gravitational fields made navigation treacherous. For decades, the Syndicate had operated with impunity, knowing that no military force would risk ships in such dangerous space. They hadn't counted on humans. Ma'am, we're getting interference from the gas clouds, reported Commander Walsh, Chen's new flag captain. Sensors are degraded. Communications are spotty. Just like they planned, Chen replied. She stood in the command center of her flagship, now called the UES Vengeance, studying the tactical display. They think the nebula protects them. It doesn't. It just makes it harder for anyone to witness what we're about to do. The task force entered the nebula in formation, using specialized navigation equipment that humans had developed for operating in asteroid fields and other hazardous environments. Where other species relied on sensors, humans had learned to navigate by instinct and experience. 6 hours into the nebula, they found the first raider outpost. It was built into a large asteroid with docking facilities for dozens of ships and what appeared to be a significant civilian population. Sensor readings suggested over 2,000 life forms, including many that registered as distressed or malnourished. Slaves, said Commander Martinez from the UES Thunder. Has to be. Life support readings show people being kept in substandard conditions. Chen opened a channel to all ships. Remember, we're here to rescue civilians and eliminate pirates. Watch your fire around the slave pens, but everything else is fair game. The assault was swift and brutal. Marine dropships launched from the carriers while the heavy cruisers targeted the outpost's defenses. The raiders had grown comfortable in their hidden base, believing themselves safe from retaliation. Their defenses were minimal, designed more to keep slaves from escaping than to repel military assault. Within an hour, the outpost was secured. The Marines found exactly what they'd expected: hundreds of slaves from a dozen different species, including 37 humans taken from farming colonies over the past 2 years. The pirates they found alive were given the same mercy they'd shown their victims: none. But the real shock came when the Marines explored the deeper levels of the asteroid base. They found evidence of something far worse than simple piracy. "Commodore," came Major Rodriguez's voice over the comm, "you need to see this." Chen took a shuttle to the asteroid, accompanied by a full security detail. What Rodriguez showed her in the lower levels made her question whether there were any limits to sentient cruelty. The Crimson Tide hadn't just been stealing food and taking slaves. They'd been conducting experiments on their captives, testing the effects of starvation and various toxins. Children as young as 5 had been subjected to procedures that violated every treaty on biological warfare and medical ethics. "How many?" Chen asked quietly. "We found the remains of over 300 test subjects, all different species, including about 50 humans. Some of these experiments—" Rodriguez, a veteran of 2 wars, couldn't finish the sentence. Chen studied the evidence with the cold detachment of someone who had learned to function despite witnessing unforgivable horrors. When she spoke again, her voice was flat and emotionless. "Major, gather all the surviving pirates, every single one." "Ma'am, I said gather them, all of them." An hour later, 47 captured raiders stood in the asteroid's main docking bay, guarded by Marines with expressions of barely contained rage. They knew what their captors had found in the lower levels. Chen walked slowly down the line of prisoners, studying faces that ranged from defiant to terrified. These weren't desperate criminals driven to crime by circumstance. These were monsters who had chosen to torture innocents for profit and entertainment. "I've read your files," she told them. "The Galactic Council considers you pirates. They have laws about treating prisoners of war, about due process and rehabilitation." She paused in front of the syndicate's leader, a hegemony exile named Krath. "I don't." She activated a holographic display showing the experimental chambers below. "You turned children into test subjects. You tortured families while recording their pain for entertainment. You sold sapient beings like livestock." The prisoners began to understand that their captors were not following the usual rules of engagement. "The laws of war were written by civilized beings to govern conflicts between civilized societies," Chen continued. "But you're not civilized, you're parasites, and humanity has developed its own methods for dealing with parasites." She nodded to Major Rodriguez, who activated the docking bay's atmospheric evacuation system. The prisoners had time to understand what was happening before the bay doors opened and exposed them to space. When the task force left the nebula 12 hours later, the Crimson Tide Syndicate no longer existed. Their base was a drifting hulk, their ships were scrap metal, and their leadership had learned the hard way that humans did not follow the galaxy's genteel rules about prisoner treatment. Word of the nebula operation spread quickly through underworld networks. The surviving slaves, rescued and returned to their homes, carried stories of the humans who had come without warning and eliminated their captors without mercy or hesitation. The galactic media called it a massacre. Human news services called it justice. In the Outer Rim territories, colonists and traders called it hope. Chen read the reports from her ready room as the task force moved toward their next target. The Council was demanding her immediate arrest. 3 major powers were threatening to cease all trade with humanity. Diplomatic relations were at their lowest point since first contact. She deleted the messages without responding and pulled up intelligence reports on the next pirate organization that needed elimination. The Vortex Cartel controlled 6 systems in the Outer Rim, specializing in kidnapping wealthy colonists for ransom and selling exotic sentience to private collectors in the core worlds. They had just moved to the top of her target list. A soft chime indicated an incoming message from Admiral Harrison. Chen opened it, expecting new orders or political pressure to modify her tactics. Instead, she found a single line of text. "The President sends his compliments. Continue current operations." Chen smiled for the first time in weeks. It seemed that Earth's government had finally decided which side of the line they stood on. The galaxy's criminals were about to discover that humanity's patience had officially run out. Outside her window, the stars wheeled slowly past as the task force set course for their next destination. Behind them, the space where the Crimson Tide had operated was now clean and safe. Ahead lay more targets, more monsters wearing sentient faces who preyed on the innocent. They would all learn the same lesson. The galaxy might have rules about mercy, but humanity had rules about justice. And justice, as delivered by Task Force Retribution, was swift, final, and absolute. 1 year after Kepler 442, the galaxy had divided into two camps, those who condemned humanity's methods and those who secretly thanked them for results. Pirate attacks in human-patrolled sectors had dropped to nearly zero. Slave markets in the Outer Rim had collapsed as suppliers disappeared or fled to safer professions. Criminal organizations that had operated with impunity for centuries were disbanding rather than risk encountering task force retribution. But the galaxy's criminal underworld was not going down without a fight. Commodore Sarah Chen stood in the command center of the UES Vengeance, studying intelligence reports that painted a disturbing picture. The surviving pirate organizations had formed an unprecedented alliance called the Liberation Front. Their stated goal was to eliminate human presence in the Outer Rim territories and restore their traditional operations. "Ma'am," reported Commander Walsh, "we're receiving a transmission from Admiral Harrison. Priority Alpha encryption." Chen stepped into her private communications chamber as the Admiral's image materialized in blue holographic light. Harrison looked older than Chen remembered, with new lines around her eyes and gray streaking her hair. "Commodore, I assume you've seen the intelligence reports about this Liberation Front." "Yes, sir. Estimated fleet strength of 200 vessels, including some military surplus. They've unified every major criminal organization from the Perseus Arm to the Sagittarius border." Harrison nodded grimly. "It gets worse. We have intelligence suggesting they've made a deal with the Hegemony Resistance. Military hardware, combat training, possibly even fleet officers." The Hegemony Resistance was a terrorist organization that opposed the galactic government through violence and sabotage. Their involvement elevated this from a police action to something approaching actual warfare. "What are our orders, Admiral?" "The Council is putting pressure on Earth to recall Task Force Retribution. They claim your operations are destabilizing the galactic economy and threatening interstellar peace." Harrison smiled coldly. The President's response was to authorize Operation Clean Sweep. Chen felt her pulse quicken. "Sir? Full military authorization, Commodore. You're no longer operating under police powers. As of today, Task Force Retribution is redesignated as the 1st Expeditionary Fleet with authority to engage in full combat operations against hostile forces." The Admiral transmitted new orders that made Chen's previous mission seem restrained by comparison. The gloves were officially off. "Intelligence suggests the Liberation Front is planning a major operation against human colonies. We don't know where or when, but satellite imagery shows them massing their fleet in the Dead Zone." The Dead Zone was a region of space where a supernova had sterilized dozens of star systems 3 million years ago. High radiation levels and unstable space-time made it nearly impossible to navigate, which made it perfect for hiding large fleets. "Your mission is simple, Commodore. Find them and destroy them. All of them. No survivors, no prisoners, no mercy. The galaxy wants to see human savagery? Give them something that will make them afraid to even think about harming our people." After the transmission ended, Chen sat alone in her chamber, considering the magnitude of what she'd been ordered to do. The Liberation Front represented over 50 criminal organizations and possibly 20,000 personnel. What Harrison was asking for wasn't a police operation or even a military campaign. It was genocide. She thought about the children in the Crimson Tide's experimental chambers, the families tortured for entertainment on Kepler 442, the thousands of civilians who had died while the galaxy's civilized powers filed paperwork and held committee meetings about appropriate responses to criminal activity. Chen activated her ship's communication system and called for a fleet assembly meeting. 3 hours later, the captains of every ship in the 1st Expeditionary Fleet gathered in the Vengeance's main briefing room. These were veteran officers who had seen humanity's enemies at their worst and had learned to respond in kind. As Chen outlined their new mission, she watched their faces harden with resolve. "Questions?" she asked, after finishing the briefing. Captain Morrison of the UES Righteous raised her hand. "Ma'am, the radiation levels in the dead zone will play hell with our systems. How do we navigate that nightmare?" "Very carefully," Chen replied. "We'll be using new shielding technology and specialized navigation protocols. The same radiation that protects them will hide our approach." "What about civilian casualties?" asked Captain Singh from the UES Retribution. "Some of these organizations might have families aboard their ships." Chen's expression grew cold. Anyone traveling with these fleets made their choice when they decided to support the torture and murder of innocents. There are no civilians in this operation, only enemies and future enemies. The Dead Zone mission launched 2 weeks later. The 1st Expeditionary Fleet had been reinforced with additional ships and specialized equipment for operating in high radiation environments. Intelligence pinpointed the Liberation Front's staging area in the ruins of the Thanatos system, where a gas giant's moons provided natural asteroid fields for hiding large fleets. The approach took 6 days of careful navigation through space that seemed actively hostile to life. Radiation storms played havoc with electronics, while gravitational anomalies from collapsed neutron stars made faster-than-light travel impossible. The fleet had to use conventional drives, creeping through space like submarines in an ocean of death. On the 7th day, they found their target. The Liberation Front had turned the Thanatos system into a massive military base. Hundreds of ships filled the space around the gas giant, from converted civilian vessels to stolen military destroyers. Artificial habitats constructed from salvaged materials housed thousands of personnel. It was the largest concentration of criminal forces ever assembled. "My God," whispered Commander Walsh as the tactical display populated with target markers. "There must be 300 ships out there." Chen studied the enemy formation with the calm of someone who had moved beyond normal human emotions. "Signal all ships. Begin Operation Clean Sweep. No survivors." What happened next would be debated by military historians for generations. The 1st Expeditionary Fleet struck the Liberation Front base like a hammer of steel and fire. Human weapons technology, designed by a species that had spent millennia perfecting the art of killing its own kind, proved devastatingly effective against opponents who had never faced coordinated military assault. The pirates had numbers but no discipline. Their ships were heavily armed but poorly coordinated. When the human fleet materialized out of the radiation storms like vengeful ghosts, the criminal alliance's formation collapsed into chaos. Chen watched the battle from her command center with surgical detachment. Each enemy ship that died represented fewer monsters who would prey on innocent families. Each habitat that burst into flame meant fewer torture chambers and slave pens. "Ma'am," reported her tactical officer, "we're getting surrender signals from multiple enemy vessels." "Ignored," Chen replied without hesitation. "Continue firing." The battle lasted 14 hours. When it ended, the Thanatos system contained nothing but expanding clouds of debris and radiation. 300 criminal vessels had been reduced to scrap metal. Estimated casualties exceeded 20,000, making it the largest military engagement in the Outer Rim's recorded history. The human fleet had lost 2 destroyers and suffered minor damage to several other ships. Total casualties: 37 dead, 91 wounded. As the fleet prepared to leave the dead zone, Chen received a transmission from one of her scout ships operating on the system's periphery. "Commodore, we've detected escape pods. Looks like some of the pirates managed to abandon ship before we hit them." Chen considered for a moment. The escape pods contained perhaps 100 survivors who would carry word of what had happened here to every criminal organization in the galaxy. "Let them go," she ordered. "Ma'am, let them go. I want survivors. I want them to tell everyone what happens when you threaten human civilians." The return journey took 2 weeks. By the time the first expeditionary fleet reached human space, news of the Thanatos massacre had spread throughout the galaxy. The reaction was immediate and explosive. The Galactic Council convened emergency sessions, demanding Earth's immediate censure and Chen's arrest for war crimes. 3 major powers formally severed diplomatic relations with humanity. Trade embargoes were announced. Military buildups began in several core systems as alien civilizations prepared for what they assumed would be human expansion into their territory. But in the Outer Rim territories, the response was different. Pirate attacks ceased entirely in dozens of systems. Slave traders abandoned their routes and fled to the galactic periphery. Criminal organizations that had operated for centuries suddenly found themselves unable to recruit new members. The survivors of Thanatos spread their story throughout the underworld. Humans didn't just kill their enemies, they erased them from existence. They showed no mercy, accepted no surrender, and treated criminal activity against their people as an existential threat requiring total elimination. Chen read the diplomatic protests and media condemnations from her office at the new human naval base on Proxima Station. The galaxy's civilized powers were horrified by humanity's methods, but they couldn't argue with the results. For the first time in recorded history, the Outer Rim territories were becoming genuinely safe for civilian populations. A soft chime announced an incoming message from Admiral Harrison. When the transmission cleared, Chen was surprised to see the Admiral flanked by 2 men in civilian clothes bearing the insignia of Earth's highest government. "Commodore Chen," said the older civilian, "I'm President Martinez. This is Secretary of Defense Coleman. We wanted to personally commend your service to human civilization." Chen remained at attention. "Thank you, sir." The galaxy's reaction to our policies has been intense, Martinez continued. "Several powers are threatening military action if we don't recall our forces and submit to council oversight." "What are your orders, Mr. President?" Martinez smiled grimly. "You misunderstand, Commodore. I'm not calling to give you orders. I'm calling to give you resources. The Senate has authorized the construction of 50 new ships for your fleet and recruitment of 30,000 additional Marines." Chen felt something she hadn't experienced in months: surprise. "Sir? The galaxy seems to think we're monsters for protecting our own people. If that's what they want to believe, we might as well give them something to really be afraid of." The president leaned forward. "Your new mission is to establish permanent human military presence throughout the Outer Rim. Any system with human colonies gets a garrison. Any trade route used by human merchants gets patrol coverage." Secretary Coleman stepped forward. "The other powers are free to object, Commodore, but they'll do so knowing that attacking human interests now means war with a species that just eliminated 20,000 enemies without breaking stride." After the transmission ended, Chen walked to the observation deck of Proxima Station and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, alien diplomats were debating humanity's place in galactic civilization. Politicians were making speeches about human aggression and the threat of militaristic expansion. They were missing the point entirely. Humanity had never wanted to be the galaxy's police force. They had never sought to impose their will on other species or expand their territory through conquest. All they had ever wanted was to be left alone to build their colonies and trade with whoever would have them. But the galaxy had made that impossible. By treating human lives as acceptable losses and human colonies as convenient targets, the other species had forced humanity to make a choice: accept their role as victims, or teach everyone why Earth had produced the most successful predators in its planet's history. The choice had been surprisingly easy. Chen returned to her office and began reviewing deployment orders for the expanded fleet. 50 new ships meant 50 new systems under human protection. 30,000 Marines meant that no pirate base or slave market would be safe anywhere in human space. The galaxy wanted to see human monsters. She would show them creatures so terrifying that the mere rumor of their presence would send criminals fleeing to the dark spaces between stars. And perhaps, when the screaming finally stopped, the galaxy might remember why it was a bad idea to make humans angry.